crews, whoever does pruning, you have to show that you've trained them every year on the national standards and that you're doing the national standards. And then finally, you have a tree planting and public education program. And so KV has a tree replacement program to take those big tall trees out directly under power lines and put something more appropriate. And they have a public education program through your processes. So, that defines now the national standards for pruning. Do we have questions? Yes?
Is there a time of year that's best for pruning?
Yes. There are 2 seasons that are better for pruning, spring and fall. Unfortunately, utilities can't abide by that because they've got the prune lines all year long. It also depends on how much foliage you take out of it as to whether or not it has that large of an effect. So if I took 10% of foliage out of it, I could do that basically any time of year I wanted to. If I'm taking a lot more than that, then it would be better on the tree if I wait until the tree's dormant in the fall or winter. Okay. If it's for flowers, you know, if I've got a rhododendron or something that I want to prune, but I don't want to take the flowers off, then I have to know when does it flower. Does it flower on last year's growth or this year's new growth? And that determines when I prune it in order not to destroy the flowers. But usually on utility, we're not talking about that. We're talking about growth. Yes? Oh, sorry. Yes?
Is tree topping reversible?
Reversible?
Yes.
To some extent, but not really. If it was done one time and it's been a while and the tree's able to respond back to it, eventually some of those water sprouts will become, that don't break out, will become stronger branches. And 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, you may find a situation where the tree's actually recovered to some extent. But in reality, once you start that process, it's always there. The water sprouts are going to break out. You're going to have decay in those stubs. It depends on the species. Again, decay is dependent on 2 factors, the way you prune it and how strong that tree is to fight decay. If we're talking about a silver maple, all bets are off, because silver maple just decays immediately when he has a wound. If you're talking about a tree that defends itself against wood decay, possibly. But that, you've asked a tough question, because I've seen trees that were topped one time 20 years after the fact, and you've still got issues in there about wood structure. You know, as it gets heavier and heavier and taller and bigger, and are these limbs going to break out when they get 12 inches in diameter as opposed to what they are now? So it is reversible to some extent, but it depends greatly upon how much it's been done, how much decay is in there, and how healthy the tree is. It's really tough to reverse it. Sorry, that's just the rules of the game, nature. Any other questions? Has this been helpful? Yes. Does it help answer any questions? Remember, though, that the flower pruning is applicable to your house. You got a yard, you got a big maple tree in your yard, and your husband's mowing under it, or you're mowing under it with a riding mower, and you're hitting your head every time you go under it, and you want to know, can I take that limb off? The answer is, yeah, depends. It would be best to take it off in the fall if it's too big of a limb. But if you prune it correctly, then you're not going to damage the tree. You're going to lessen the chance of damaging it. But if you prune it, if you just stub cut it, you're going to end up with decay going into the main trunk of the tree. Has anybody ever seen a tree that's perfectly healthy looking from the outside, and it was cut down and it was hollow? The center of it was eaten out? That's wood decay. And what happened is the tree compartmentalized around the decay, okay? Like a ship would seal off compartments. The tree has compartments. They are very highly organized. I don't know if y'all know this, but they're the most highly organized plants we have on this planet. And they have compartments inside. And I didn't get into that. I did with the panel on the first talk because we had a lot more time to do it. But like a ship, they will seal off compartments. And how well those compartments seal off determines how well that tree can survive against that wood decay. And what happens when you see a hollow tree is that decay got into the central column. The tree formed a barrier zone of chemicals and sealed it off, but it lost the entire center of the tree. And that's what happens when it seals a compartment. It says forever and ever, I'm losing that much tissue. But if I can keep it right there, I won't lose myself. So that's, that's what happened. Titanic, the reason Titanic was lost is because it opened too many compartments, too much weight, too much water came in, started getting over the bulkheads. If they had been able to seal the compartments and hold that water in those compartments, it would have been able to lend back and get fixed. A tree is trying to do that. It seals it off in those compartments. And if it fails in doing that, that decay then gets the better part of it, eats too much healthy tissue up, and then it can't manufacture. It can't transport material. It can't transport water up from the roots, and it can't transport food from the leaves down. So, and it dies. So that's how a tree, it's interesting, but that's how a tree can be totally healthy from the outside looking at it, and then falls over in your yard in a storm, and the whole center of it is decayed out. And that's simply the compartmentalization that's going on inside that tree. That tree really needed that central column for structural integrity, but it didn't have a choice. It had to form barrier zones and seal off that decay. Some trees are better at it than others. Yes?
Is there a general rule of thumb if somebody's going to plant in their yard? Exactly, just a good rule of thumb, how far away to plant?
Sure. Sure. It's based on the size of the tree.
I mean, is there a good average regardless of size of tree? I mean, I know certain trees will grow bigger than others, but...
Right. It's, let's take, and I'm trying to do this in my memory because we have neat little diagrams that show that, and your utility has neat little diagrams, but small flowering trees that get no taller than 20, 25 feet at maturity, back it off 5 feet, 10 feet if you can, dead center of the line, at least give yourself a little bit of room. Then you generally don't have problems. If it's a medium-sized tree like a maple tree, give yourself 30 feet if you can. And that's where you plant the tree. If it's 30 feet directly under the power line, it's most likely, if it ever needs pruning, all it will need is just a couple of clips on the end. If it's a really tall growing tree, back it off 50 feet or better. Okay? But there's the argument, because we take a medium-sized tree of maple, and instead of giving it 30 feet from the power line, we plant it directly under the power line. Then there's no room to get it. The tree wants to grow to be 100 feet tall, 70, 80 feet tall. Yes?
How important is it when you are pruning a tree to train to go around obstacles to do like a slant cut on the limb so that it's forcing it to grow in that direction? Or is that necessary and you can just do a straight prune?
What you're doing in lateral pruning is you're selecting a branch that is headed away from your obstacle. The pictures that I showed you early on, and you make a straight cut right there at that junction point. Okay? It's crucial that you make the cut at that junction point. You don't go behind it, you don't go in front of it. If you go in front of it, you leave a stub, and that decays back into the main trunk. If you cut behind it, that's really a no-no, because what we call the branch collar is where the branch attaches to the main part of the trunk. You will have a swelling of tissue there. You'll have an enlarged area where that trunk, where my thumb joins my hand, it's kind of a larger area right there. If you cut and leave that larger area intact, that's the branch collar. That will seal over that injury so that it doesn't get into the main part of the trunk. If you ignore that,